Boys, the plan is simple. We are playing true Draco Metalfoes. This is without a doubt the best common charity deck you can play in Master Duel. This is the deck that took down Distant Coder Subathon's first ever and the only ever common charity event in Master Duel, where the stipulation is you can only use cards that are normal and rare. Shout out to Zem for basically taking the list that I made and carrying it to victory. And this, with just a tiny little bit of adjustment, is the list that I believe that anyone is able to pilot within a common charity format in Master Duel to extremely high finishes, if not just straight out winning every single event. So I'm going to give you guys a brief discussion about what the true Draco cards of the Metalfoes do, a little bit of a card by card, and of course some of that sweet gameplay. So let's get started. So this deck can be very easily broken into two camps, the Metalfoes and the true Dracos. So let's start off with the first half, the Metalfoes. The Metalfoes are a series of Pendulum monsters who were the first ever released Pendulum monsters to not be garbage. The Pendulum Magicians originally had very low scales, despite having relatively powerful effects. They only spanned from 2 to 5, which is awful. And the Cleaforts and such had summoning restrictions on what you were able to summon. So the Cleaforts were only able to Pendulum summon Cleaforts, which wasn't terrible, but it wasn't that good for generic Pendulum support. And the Metalfoes are the only ones at that period of time who were able to have no restriction and a 1 to 8 scale, which is very good. Additionally, you could pop other face-up monsters or cards you control. That's not restricted to just monsters, of course. Destroy them, and if you do, you could set a Metalfoes spell trap from your deck. And that includes stuff like fusion spells and specials from deck, as well as floats. These were incredibly powerful at just facilitating Pendulum as an archetype and shell for an extremely long time, and they were played in tons of decks that were at the top of tier 1. Stuff like Zodiac and True Draco played these because of incidental synergies with cards within the archetype, such as the Zodiacs being able to go to MX Saber Invoker without having to use their normal summon, and True Dracos being able to tribute themselves over continuous spells and traps that they set, as well as get them onto the board for free using a Pendulum summon. Stuff like Metalfoes Combination was able to be tribute summoned over by Ignis, and not only would you get the free material for the tribute summon, as well as Ignis's ability to add, but you would also get the add off of Combination, which was insane. And that is sort of why these two cards, archetypes, were actually married together for a pretty long time, and were especially facilitated by cards like Masterpiece and a bunch of other stuff from that era that was absolutely broken. However, it is 2022 and a lot of cards from that era are banned. Stuff like Masterpiece and Electromite were immediately banned in the TCG once those started to take off and facilitate really unhealthy styles of gameplay. But because this is Master Duel and this is Fantasyland, we are able to play this deck as a common charity deck. Note that this is only specifically built for common charity. This isn't really going to be great for high ladder climbing or anything like that. This is good only if you want to play a deck that's entirely comprised of Ns and Rs and play against other decks that are entirely comprised of Ns and Rs. And I think that True Draco Metal is extremely good at doing so. So let's get into the card by card. For the Metalfoes, we are playing every single main deck one that we can play. 3 Steelin, 3 Silvered, 3 Gold Driver, 3 Volflame, 3 Bismugear, 3 Melcaster, 2 Counter, 2 Combination, 2 Parametal, and 1 full Metalfoes Fusion. All of the main deck vanillas, they all literally have the same effect, and you want to see them in basically multiples, because they all basically, again, have the same effect, and seeing multiples of them allows you to just pop one, pop the other, and just repeat the cycle, get some fusions out, and of course get really easy access to your scales. The only exceptions to these that are effect monsters are Bismugear, which during the end phase is a Scarm for any Metalfoes monster, and Melcaster, which allows you to add a face-up Metalfoes monster from your extra deck back into your hand when Melcaster gets popped. Really good stuff. Metalfoes Counter allows you to special a Metalfoes monster from your deck if a card is destroyed by battle or card effect, which is really slow in the actual game, but in Common Charity, where not a whole lot of spot removal exists, or the spot removal that does exist is either exactly Utgarda in generators or battle-based, Metalfoes counter is extremely good for being able to float, generate advantage, stabilize, etc. Its graveyard effect is also great, being able to add a face-up Metalfoes Pendulum monster from your extra deck to your hand. But none of these effects are once per turn, and they're absolutely insane. Metalfoes combination is pretty irrelevant. Its first effect is completely worthless, being able to reborn a Metalfoes in graveyard that has a lower level fusion than the fusion monster you summoned. Sometimes it comes up being able to bring back like a Gold Driver Silvered, but 99% of the time you're either going to be tribute summoning it over it using like an Ignis or a Majesty Maiden, or you're going to be popping it on a following turn 3 or 4 with a Metalfoes card in order to get a search and an additional set. The fusion spells are Para-Metalfoes Fusion and Full Metalfoes Fusion. This card is extremely searchable and we only need to play it at 1. Para-Metalfoes Fusion, we kind of need to play it at 2 because originally one of these would be Metalfoes Fusion, just the original one, but that card is an SR, and Para-Metalfoes Fusion acts as ways to get into our fusion part of our extra deck and is really, really critical that we always have access to at least one, because if our Mithrilium does get chaliced or negated in some way when trying to shuffle back one of our Para-Metalfoes Fusion, things can become extremely dicey if we only have one Para-Metalfoes Fusion, so we kind of got to play 2. For consistency, of course, we are just playing 3 Summoner Art, which is going to grab exclusively Volflame, which isn't that bad. For the true Dracos, we're playing 1 Majesty Maiden, 2 Ignis, 2 True Draco Heritage, 1 Disciples, 2 Apocalypse, and 1 True King's Return. These are all basically good enough cards that you're able to run. Ideally, we would have Dynamite Knight guy in here in order to search the traps, in which are the absolute best ones. But unfortunately, because he's an SR, we can't really play him. However, these cards do serve purpose as being spot removal by being able to be popped by the Metalfoes or tributed over. Or you could use stuff like Heritage to be popped by the Metalfoes to act as spot removal for your opponent's back row. And if you want to get really cute, you could pop your own combination with something like a Heritage. Really, really nice stuff. You only play 1 Majesty Maiden because she kind of sucks, and 2 Ignis because he's pretty good, but not good enough to run at 3. And of course, we're running 3 Bow Baboon. This allows you to sort of smooth out hands where you're sort of digging for specific cards, and Bow Baboon is really, really good at doing so, being able to draw a card and place a card from top to or bottom to your deck. And additionally, if this card is popped by battle or card effect, say by a Metalfoes, you can summon 2 copies from it, any number basically, from your deck onto the board. Really, really powerful stuff. And being able to just use that non-once per turn draw and cycling effect is extremely good, as well as to get 2 free materials for link summoning. Onto the extra deck, we've got 1 Metalfoes Adamati, who is pretty good when you're just trying to go for a push for lethal with something like a full Metalfoes Fusion in hand. 3 Mithrilium, because this card is absolutely bonkers. 1 Odd Eyes Vortex Dragon and the Odd Eyes Absolute Dragon, who is pretty okay and able to be made due to cards like Metalfoes Melcaster and Volflame being level 7s that are basically sometimes summonable. Just be sure to have a face-up monster in your Pendulum deck, or extra deck, whatever. 1 Orichalc, you could run 2, but Orichalc is pretty bad. But overall, it's a pretty neat card that you want to run. If you're running multiple full Metalfoes Fusion, or you want to link it off, running multiple Orichalc is pretty good because you get to use it as a removal option, being that its graveyard effect allows you to pop a card on the board. Running 1 Super Quantal Mech Beast as a rank 3 because we could use 2 Bow Baboons to go into it, and it will either pop our opponent's back row or we could pop our own combination, which is very, very cute. The Odd Eyes Vortex, Odd Eyes Absolute that we mentioned before. 1 Gravity Controller. This is sort of for scenarios where we're going Mithrilium in the EMZ, special summon Gravity Controller, and using that to trigger our Mithrilium Engraved to go for the Reborn floating effect, which is really important sometimes. Sun Avalon Dryas is for one of our Bow Baboons in case we're going for a Cross Sheep line, because Cross Sheep does require 2 monsters with different names. Speaking of, we're running 1 Cross Sheep who is able to basically get us off to the races for link spam plays, because guess what Mithrilium is? A fusion monster. We summon Mithrilium to the Cross Sheep zone. Cross Sheep brings something back, and we can go into one of our link 3s. We're playing 1 Geonator Transfer, so this card's a little too cute. You can cut this card if you really want to for something like another rank 3, such as Gossip Shadow, but I just kind of like it because it's funny. It's Geonator Transfer, like shit. I like this card. One heavy Metalfoes Amalgam. This card is terrible, but sometimes you need it in order to get over monsters, because its graveyard effect is to basically give a monster 1,000 attack points, which is pretty neat. One Triple Burst Dragon, because it is a pretty generic Link 3 and helps get over floaters. And of course, one Berserker of the Tenyi, because it's big and is our only way to deal with extremely large monsters such as Draglubion or Utgarda. So, let's get into the game. So I know I said that this deck wasn't great for competitive play, because obviously it's only commons and R's without any real generic trap bullshit, but our hand is absolutely insane as we play against Eldritch, who decides to set to pass. They're going to pass it back to us, and we draw Volflame off the top, which is very, very nice. We're going to activate Disciples of the True Draco Phoenix. We're going to activate its effect to get an additional Tribute Summon, and they're going to activate Skill Drain, which is pretty bad for us because we do want to use our Baobaboon in order to cycle. So we are going to use the Disciples in order to pop the Skill Drain. They're not going to respond with their other set card, and we're going to activate Volflame and Silvered. We're going to pen summon exactly only the Baobaboon. We're going to cycle and pitch the Majesty Maiden because we really want specifically that card to, you know, be important. They're going to Maxi us on the Baobaboon in Graveyard effect. Not really sure why they didn't Maxi us on the Pendulum Summon, but we're going to chain Ignister to the effect of the Maxi in order to activate Heritage, who is able to draw us a card, which is super, super neat. We're going to summon two Baobaboons from deck. They're both going to trigger their effects, which is super, super nice. And let's see what we find off the top. Off of the first Baobaboon, we're going to draw a Gold Driver, and we're going to put the Steel in back in the bottom. And we draw full Metalfoes Fusion, which we're going to put on the top. We're going to then use Heritage to draw a card, and guess what we found? Because it's on top, full Metalfoes Fusion. We're going to set combination, because it realistically doesn't really matter at this point. Heritage is going to pop that set card. We're going to Pendulum summon the Gold Driver from hand. We're going to go straight into the battle phase. Baobaboon's going to swing for 12. Baobaboon's going to swing for 12. Ignis is going to swing for 24. Gold Driver's going to swing for 19. And because we have the full Metal Fusion that we stacked off of the Baobaboon, we're going to be able to Fusion summon a Metalfoes Adamanti and go for game under Max C. Absolutely incredible. So let's talk about the pros and cons. 1, this deck is consistent. Who would have guessed that playing 25 of the same card in the main deck that all basically do the same thing is really, really good for your deck's overall strategy. 2, this deck has an incredible time going both first and second. Going first, being able to set up counters for follow-up play is surprisingly good when you consider that most decks in this format can't really OTK you or set up negates for those counters. And additionally, the True Draco spells and traps act as great ways of spot removal for stuff such as Heart Earth Dragon. And 3, this deck is really, really sticky. If you're able to stabilize at any point and your opponent can't consistently clear your board every single turn, you will win just by the sheer fact that your Metalfoes cards are going to grind, your True Draco cards are going to grind. You will be in a great position overall to the longer the game goes. And the cons. 1, this deck can't really play through multiple layers of disruption. 1, it can play through pretty easily, but 2 and 3, it's going to be pretty reliant on how well you open. 2, because of how big these engines are, we aren't realistically able to play stuff like generic back row that's generically accessible by other decks, such as Forbidden Chalice, the Paleozoics, and the Torrentials, which isn't always bad, but it can be pretty difficult for us to play into those specific cards, like we mentioned earlier. And 3, this deck is hard. Like, this deck is really fucking hard. If you do not have a NASA patented license to kill, this is a very difficult deck to consistently do well with. You can get away with playing generator good stuff and basically maybe come like top 4 pretty consistently, but this is a deck that if you want to win, you will have to dedicate a lot of time into playing each turn optimally, turn after turn after turn. But overall, this deck is extremely fun, it's extremely cool, and by god, I love True Draco cards and Metalfoes cards. Thank you guys for watching. I've been Stevie Blunder, and it's gonna be it for me. See ya.